in the field of electricity, now, your book, from the time I first started teaching, has given two men credit for inventing a light bulb. They were Edison and Swan. Joseph Swan was European. It's now believed that Joseph Swan invented the light bulb by himself about the same time Edison did, independent of Edison. Without looking at Edison's work, and Edison did not look at his. They developed it when the world was right for it. Along it came. Now, a similar invention that came about when the world was ready was the telephone. There are 70 men who claimed that they had invented a telephone. They went to court and fought lawsuit after lawsuit. These 70 men were on both sides of the Atlantic. And in the final analysis, they upheld Alexander Graham Bell because he had better documentation and he had gotten his phone conversation he could prove a little bit before the rest of them, like maybe a few hours before the rest of them. When the technology was right, several men put the telephone together. The automobile, we don't know who invented that, folks. It's just like all of a sudden a bunch of them started appearing on the scene, and historians simply can't say who the first person was. Just when the technology was right, people started putting together in their garages, in their barns. Barn might be a better word than garage in this case. And these things started pumping out of barns all over the place. Now, one invention we do know for sure who invented it was the invention of the wireless telegraph. It was invented by Marconi. Marconi found ways to send Morse code over without using wires. The invention is called radio. Marconi's device can be put together, but don't try to operate it because it will interfere with communications for the more powerful and more communicated to interfere with. But and again, there was no communication for it to interfere with in those days, so he could transmit on it. Eventually, they learned how to talk. And Marconi's telegraph was nothing more than dots and dashes. He used code. Today, we can talk on them and even send pictures. The invention of the telegraph was to lead to the invention of the talking radio and lead to the invention of television. Yes?
So he came up with Morse code, or he came up with the telegraph?
He came up with the telegraph, not the code. The code was already in use it was invented by Samuel Morse, who needed a code when he invented the wired telegraph. The original telegraphs were wired, hardwired. Marconi invented the wireless, which was basically radio. Now, I want to say this about today's inventions. The days of the talented inventor are practically over. Today's inventions are made by corporations, are made by teams of men. A man will join a team for a while, then leave it, and join and leave it. The big invention of my day, that was not around when I was younger, is the microchip or the microprocessor. And it was invented by teams of men and improved on by teams of men working together. No one person can take credit for it. The microprocessor led to the invention of the laptop computer or the microcomputer, as well as the cell phone, remote controlled devices, iPods, iPads, all kinds of stuff. Again, the stuff that we see being invented today are being put together by teams of men working together as teams, not by the talented individual. And this has been true for about the last 90 years. The days of the talented lone inventor ended around the year 1920. With the invention of, with the widespread use of steel, there came about the steel ship that replaced the wooden sailing vessel. The steel ship was steam powered, and it led more and more to what your book calls a world economy. In other words, ships were much larger now, and they could travel much faster, and that meant that trade was going to be much more widespread than it was. And again, this business of trade is very important. I mean, even to put together something simple well, I won't call something, to put together something like an automobile, you have to buy parts, some of the parts you find in this place and some in that place, and you have to get all these parts together. There's no one place in the world that has all the parts you need, even to put together a computer. You no one place in the world that has all the parts. You have to collect the parts from wherever you can find them. Again, trade became a big thing, and you've gotten more and more into a world economy where that there was a time when one nation might be prospering and its neighbor floundering. Today, the whole world is either prospering or floundering. When Greece gets into trouble, we feel it here. When China starts getting into economic trouble, it's felt all over the world. Well, yesterday, I believe Italy changed prime ministers, and everybody, wait, let's see what the world's market, how the world markets respond to this. A prime minister was assassinated a few years back in Pakistan, and the markets plunged 400 or 500 points the following day. The whole world was affected. Again, they talk about the global economy began about 200 years ago. It's much, much more a global economy today than it was then. Now, Karl Marx. Somehow me talking about him today does not get young people as excited as they once did, because ever since 1989 and 1990, with the downfall of communism in Russia, Karl Marx doesn't seem to be as important. The fact is, communism is still the dominant philosophy in China, and Marx is still highly, highly influential among some people. Essentially, Karl Marx started off as a Jew, but his family decided that Protestantism would be more acceptable, so they converted to Protestantism, and some people believe this somewhat tore up Marx's youth. But Marx was sent to a theological seminary where he studied theology, but eventually he came to believe that there was no God, and he developed ideas about how the universe was put together, that he believed that, well, basically that we could create a utopia here on earth. His ideas, instead of being called socialism, are actually called communism. And what's the difference between communism and socialism? Simply this. I mean, communism is much more extreme. The word communism comes from the word commune, which means that everybody lives in communes. And the center of everybody's life is around his commune or his village. And basically there is no private ownership of property. To me, the best example of communism was the North American Indians, or the tribal peoples of Africa and Southeast Asia, where everybody lives in a village, and the village takes care of you, and you have cradle-to-grave care, cradle-to-grave welfare. But Marx believed this would result in a heavenly utopia here on earth if everybody lived in these communes, and the commune owned everything about you from cradle to grave. You'd be taken care of. And all the wealth that the commune put together would be distributed. His famous quote, from each according to his ability, to each according to his need. But he believed that this trend toward communism was inevitable. And this is where that communism then winds up becoming a religion more than a philosophy. The belief in the inevitability. And let me tell you, when I was at UT, I had a Marxist professor, but even he had to admit that the belief in inevitability was not a valid doctrine for persons who claim that they don't believe in any kind of worldview. But he believed that the trend toward communism was inevitable, and communism would inevitably triumph. He interpreted all of history as being nothing more than a class struggle. Where that every elite class would struggle against the other, whether it be in Roman times the patrician against the plebeian, or in modern times the worker against the manager, the rich against the poor, that all of history could be explained in terms of class struggle. And the ultimate goal would be to bring down the rich. And then you can bring down kings. In other words, he pictured a world where there'd be no government, no king, no money, no private ownership of property, and basically no social classes. And he believed that this would lead to an end of all wars. And basically a heaven on earth would result, and eventually we'd go on to find cures for diseases.